Welcome back. In February, President Obama announced a new position alongside a budget proposal to Congress asking for $19 billion for cybersecurity across the U.S. government. Just last week, the White House named retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Gregory Touhill as the government's first federal cybersecurity chief. Colin, do you think this is a little overdue?
I think, honestly, the position as is being stood up is somewhat superfluous. You need to have somebody who is at the head of the ship.
Right.
The reality of the matter is, and this is an area that I know a lot about, I mean, cybersecurity has been a threat for pretty much as long as the internet has been around, and since before then. I mean, our two biggest strategic adversaries, the Russians and Chinese, have been engaging in cyber espionage, cyber attacks on hacking, everything else, the whole gamut, not to mention criminal organizations, terrorist groups, everybody else. So the reality, I think, is between the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI, we have a fairly, it's not like we've been asleep at the wheel and not doing anything about cybersecurity. That having been said, I think it does make sense to have a government department that actually is in charge of collecting all that data from all the different branches and coordinating our national strategy for cyber defense.
I would like to suggest that the first part of that national strategy is to get the people that work for the government, including the secretaries, to use government email instead of their own. Now, whether you want to, I don't want to get into the Hillary thing right now, but I got to tell you, being in private industry for all these years, and as long as email has been around, I don't know of one company that would have allowed me to use my own personal email to do business communications, and I just think that is just plain stupid. So I think the position is very necessary, if for no other reason than to gather all this together and turn data into usable intelligence, usable information.
I think you hit something on the head as well, which is there is the reactive security piece of things. There's also the proactive in that setting policies that are in place that are agreed upon in terms of what the acceptable use of technology is, such as using a personal or not being able to use a personal email account.
Right.
I'm glad that you brought up the reactionary piece of it, because that's really how I see this. The question of whether the position is long overdue, I don't know. The plan itself, we just started talking about it back in February. So if it's reactionary, then yeah, that was long overdue. And you had also talked about organizations, private sector, facing the same types of security issues. And even though there's someone that is going to be a security officer in that position, it's all going to depend on how each agency is able to relay that to their employees. And
yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we know over time that work that is done by the federal government eventually works its way down and informs the commercial sector.
Right.
Because there are things that NASA developed that are now in use in the commercial sector, and that's just one example. I would hope that this department, this position, the work that they do would eventually help to inform the private sector in terms of how they can do a better job.
Well, and I think you're right to some degree, but I actually think that the private sector is way ahead of the federal government on this.
Absolutely,
and the reason for that
and that's wrong.
Well, it's not wrong. It has to do with the glacial pace at which any sort of change occurs in government.
Right.
Private companies, their profits are on the line, so they're incented to react very quickly to threats. The federal government takes very long to make any decision, and oftentimes that is designed that way for a reason. It's a balance on the power of government. However, when it comes to something like technology that's changing at the exponential rate that it changes, you cannot work in a glacial fashion because you're going to be completely out of step with the threats that you're being presented with. And again, I think that it's kind of a little bit of a red herring, because organizations like the NSA and the FBI have been dealing with cybersecurity for a very long time. The government has not been sitting with their cyber pants around their ankles. But again, so we're talking about coordination here. It's not like we just woke up in February and said, wait a minute, people are trying to hack us. We need to do something about it.
But again, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say I absolutely agree with you. If you recall, this whole plan was, I think, a $19 billion initiative, and it isn't going to happen just overnight. It's very expensive. It's very complex. There's long-term things that need to happen as well as short-term.
But it's definitely very necessary. And again, my earlier point about data versus information, I think that's a key element, because we all know there's not much we can do with data, but we can do a whole lot with information.
Absolutely.
So I don't know this guy's background. It sounds like he's got a lot of background for this. I have high hopes, and that's a +1 for Obama in my book, by the way, and I don't normally say that.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Well, next up on the flip side, our panel weighs in on a controversial piece of legislation. We're back in 3 minutes.